All right, welcome back to PacWest Bigfoot. This is David, and you're going to have to excuse me today because if I have to stop and clear my throat or drink something, that's because this is a little bit longer of an awesome Bigfoot encounter story today. So please forgive me. Give me a little space there, but real quick, want to announce Brian, the winner, heading into this month of an awesome little giveaway from PacWest Bigfoot. And some of you have asked me if you have to keep re-entering. No, once you get over to PacWestBigfoot.com, just look up at the top of the page there, that little color-changing bar. You can get there, you can sign up, and that's it. Basically, after that, I have a little rotator that I kind of spin through. My kids kind of like randomly stop it, and whoever's email and name is on there, that's who gets it. I will email you or Facebook you and ask you for your address and get it out to you. So that's how that works. But I give out things like knit caps, even sometimes hoodies, coffee mugs. It all kind of depends. I went ahead and I usually pick out each month of what I'm going to get out the year in advance. So each month right now, this year, I know what I'm giving out each month. I'm not going to tell you, though. I want it to be a surprise. So, like I said, this is going to be a longer encounter today. So I want to get started with this. And let me kind of straighten myself out here. Get this ready, and let's go ahead and start with this week's PacWest Bigfoot encounter story. A little sip of the old Sasquatch coffee. Ooh, that's awesome. Teenager has Bigfoot experience encounter outside Neilton, Washington. The property today is old but swallowed up by the forest, but back in the late 70s, 1979 to be exact, I lived just outside of Neilton, Washington, with my mom and dad when I had experienced Bigfoot activity and had a visual of one, the same one I believe, and on two separate occasions. Personally, I did not choose this experience, it just happened. It was scary, frightening even, although I did not, and I mean this, I did not feel truly threatened by the thing. To a 14-year-old girl, something that massive and scary looking simply made you feel afraid. Heck, it can make grown men cower in fear. But here's what happened and what led up to the sighting. The Bigfoot of Neilton. I had the inside scoop on Bigfoot at the time. Even my dad was doing a little research on the side about what I was experiencing, as he worked for the Forest Service at the time. Every time he was out in the field, he would take a few extra minutes or so and look for evidence when out in the field. And for all you conspiracy theory folks out there, he did admit later to me that this thing is held close to the chest by the USFS, and apparently that continues today. Why? Well, that is anyone's guess and theory, and boy, is there a ton of them out there. Today I am much older, and getting out into the woods where I live is no longer possible with the ailments I suffer from. But I will tell you this, I have seen them more than just that one time or two times as a girl, and I spent 2.5 decades searching on my own for them. I was not much for the limelight, so I kept on my own, and I quote, Bigfooting all to myself. I never married, but had one child, a son, who currently lives in a big city, where he spends his life working and apparently acquiring things. As for me, I miss being in the woods there, but my Bigfooting days are over now, like I said. But let's not go there. Let me tell you what happened. Many reports have been given and shared around this little town of Neilton for decades. And from the natives, apparently the stories go back a whole lot further of Bigfoot living in the area. And they were there, living, roaming, and hunting. I also personally believe along the ridges of the mountains nearby, Bigfoot go to have their offspring and raise them. But you are here to hear what happened when I was younger, and I want to share it here. We moved here to Neilton, or there to Neilton, in 1978-1979, just outside of town on a piece of property we leased for about 5 to 6 years while my father worked for the USFS. My folks, being the nature lovers they were born and raised in Detroit, actually. and after college they married and moved out here to the Pacific Northwest, where they both settled into work and raising me, their only daughter, and child for that matter, they ever had. I was just about to turn 14 years old at the time, and was used to the city life by that point. So being in the sticks, if you will, was rather exciting, to be honest. I was used to the city, but that did not mean I liked it. My mom and dad had been out here before and told me how beautiful and peaceful and much quieter it was in the city. They were right, except for the occasional screaming and hollering from what I would come to know as a Bigfoot or Sasquatch in the night. It all started a few days after spring break of 1979, about 8 months after moving there. I'd got home from school one late afternoon. Our driveway was pretty long. The open area was about 2 to 3 acres, but you had to walk through a towering tunnel of trees for about 30 to 40 yards, give or take. I kept hearing movement to the left of me inside the trees, like something walking beside me. I cannot tell if it was bipedal or not. I was young. All I knew was that there was someone or something there that was on 2 legs following me. Either way, it made me pretty nervous. As I said, I was from the city. My worries there were far more than some animal in the forest. I had 2 friends dead by the time I was 13 from being in the wrong part of the city at the wrong time, even back then. So no. Whatever this animal was made me nervous, but not scared enough to freak out. I think that would help me. The not being scared part, as I learned more about what these things were and what they are like. As I moved along up the driveway, whatever it was continued to walk beside me, but just out of sight. It did sound heavy. I remember that, and even though I am not sure it was a Bigfoot per se, I believe it was, and I believe that was the first time I had an experience with Bigfoot around the area. Personally, my gut was telling me it was something other than a mountain lion, bear, or even a wolf or coyote. By the time I hit the clearing, whatever it was turned, and after a few seconds or so, I could not hear a thing but the birds in the trees and my dad starting up the Jeep. Screams from the mountainside. It was my dad who confirmed my guess as to what I was hearing and experiencing. However, I did not tell him everything until I was much older of what I'd seen and heard. But he knew. He was a pretty perceptive guy. Many road crossings have been reported over the years, some logged, I am sure, on popular Bigfoot blogs like yours and others, but most came through government officials or offices like the state police and the USFS. One of my few visuals was a road crossing just up the road from our property itself. They, the Bigfoot I believe, lived on the ridgeline and mountain to the south of the highway. They would move through the valley, I believe, for hunting into the Quinault River, and then back again. And as fast as these things are, they could cover that distance easily. The first night I started hearing howls and screams was during spring break, just a few days or so after being followed down the driveway. It was unseasonably warm that year. At least it would be if I was still back in the city of Detroit. The West Coast was a different cold, and this was not cold. That second night of spring break, I remember, was warm enough to keep my bedroom window open for a bit. It was after dinner, and my mom and dad decided to go and grab some ice cream in town at the little store. I was sitting there doing whatever, I don't recall what, but I do recall hearing a high-pitched hollering, or better yet, moaning, screaming type thing from outside. It was like a sad moaning howl that came from atop the mountains across the road. It was rather spooky, to be honest. And I went through the house making sure lights were all on, except my bedroom. I turned off that light when I came back in and stood by the window. The moaning, or whatever it was, kept going and would last for bursts of 10 to 15 seconds at a time. I had heard coyote up to that point, and my dad made sure I knew what sounds went to what animals to keep me safe out there. This was weird. It was nothing that I'd heard up to that point. It was not a coyote. When my mom and dad returned, that is when my dad finally let loose of a little information to me and my mother about the animal known as Sasquatch. Although I like the name Bigfoot myself, it sounds, well, friendlier to me, I suppose. We all heard it. that night, and it continued on and off as we ate our ice cream on the front porch that night, listening. For the rest of the week, we heard the moaning or hollering a couple more times, but that was it. After that, it was pretty quiet for about a month or so before all heck broke loose. That's not an owl, Jim. After spring break, things were quiet, but by the time summer break was about to begin, the moaning turned into screaming one night, and so loud it woke us all up. Personally, because of a sighting I would have just a week after this, I believe it was a female Bigfoot having a baby. Seriously. But the screaming continued for at least 45 minutes to an hour, and both my mother and I were home to witness it. My father was on assignment and off for some training thing again, I recall. He had to attend many of those. Neither of us was comfortable with what we heard, and my mother was a total believer in Bigfoot herself by that point. She also believed the animal was an animal and ran on instincts, so I was to stay close to the property at all times while my dad was gone. A week later, and I would have no issue with that, seeing one of these things may be miraculous and awesome, but is also sobering and a bit scary at first for sure, especially to a 14-year-old. I'd gotten home late after school that day, and my mom was going over to a friend's house to pick up some stuff for the house they were giving away, and I did not want to go. I just wanted to go home and get my homework done. Finals were the following week. She dropped me off at the top of the driveway. By that point, there were no screams or weird sounds for days, so she must have felt comfortable with me walking the 30 yards to the house on my own. Woo, woo. I did not hear the pee in the whoop that most do. It was more like an owl that hoots, but this was no owl, and I heard it twice. I was not sure what it was, but whatever it was, it sounded deep and high-pitched all at the same time, if you know what I mean. I was feeling uneasy, so I stepped up the pace to the house. By the time I hit the clearing, it was light enough to see around the property, and that is when I saw something, and for the first time, that would change my mind about what is possible out here. It stood there looking right at me from just inside a group of trees. If it was not as massive as it was and swaying back and forth, I probably would have never noticed it was there at all. And what freaks me out to this day was how many times they were there before that without me knowing up to that point. As I mentioned, it was massive, at least 7 to 8 feet tall, and maybe taller looking back now. It was a solid black color, and I was close enough to tell it was a female. It was hairy, yeah, but you could see breasts, and the breast of the creature was just massive. My heart was going a million miles an hour. I wanted to scream and run, but my dad had told me that was the opposite of what to do in a situation like that. I took a step forward to the house, and as I did, this thing stepped out into the clearing in one massive stride. That is when I noticed something over its shoulder. It was a baby Bigfoot. Its little head peeked over her shoulder, looking the whole time, it seemed, at its mother. I could not tell its sex, as it was no bigger than a foot, maybe. It clung to her like a chimp on its mother's back. It, too, was hairy and solid black. However, it seemed to have a neck, whereas the mother did not. It had a cone-shaped head and massive shoulders. Its face was somewhat shrouded in hair, but I could see it was somewhat monkey-like, too. Its nose was flat, its skin seemed dark, leathery, and simply put, scary-looking. It was not really a V-shape in body, but it was skinnier at the waist, for sure. Its eyes were practically hidden by the thick brow line, but I saw no whites of eyes like some report, just blackness. I took a couple more slow steps, and the Bigfoot stepped back into the trees and let out another whoo, like the sound I heard before, and then it walked off with its heavy footsteps back towards the road. I ran after that, disregarding anything my father told me before. I locked the door, I remember, and called my mom over at her friend's to tell her what I saw. She was back home in minutes. The road to nowhere. For weeks after that, my mother picked me up after school through the remaining school year, and my dad was starting Started doing some research on his days off, wandering around the property and down by the river and up across the road along the mountain ridges. Things seemed to calm down a bit, and personally I think the Bigfoot laid low because of all the searching around the area my dad was conducting at the time. Like any animal, I suppose. When you're out looking for it, you better be a tracker, because they'll lay low or go into hiding. Bigfoot are no different. They will lay low, hide, or simply leave the area, period. Months later, while out for a ride from a friend's house, however, they'd be back, or at least out of hiding. My dad had to travel to Oregon for a weekend around the middle of August that summer. I was with my mom, and she was finally feeling much more comfortable without all the screaming or noticing anything out of the ordinary for nearly 2 months by that point, or a month and a half at least. Suffice it to say, we let our guard down. I was heading home. It was towards late afternoon or early evening again when I saw the same female Bigfoot cross right in front of me from one side of the road to the other. She came out from the north side and crossed over, as if heading back up the mountainside or ridge. She looked back at me with the typical arm swing, long stride, and moving the whole upper torso as she did. And yes, that little baby Bigfoot was holding on up around her neck, again. And yes, it was jet black as ever, I could see. The next thing I knew, I was hearing and even feeling a bit of the loudest screaming I'd heard in my life up to that point, and I would never hear again, or I would hear again, many, many times as I got older. But as a 14-year-old girl, it was scary to say the least. I started pedaling that bike as fast as I could all the way, and all the way I could hear the scream. By the time I reached the open area at the end of the driveway, my mother was already there running towards me. The screaming continued for a few more minutes. It was so loud I would be surprised if anyone could not hear it in town miles back down the road. My dad, when he returned, headed back up the ridge and came back with some interesting Polaroid pictures that are so faded today, unfortunately, you cannot make anything out. I only kept them because he took them. Sentimental. That's it. But back then, the footprints, tree breaks, and what looked like bedding he found seemed to be the telltale signs of a small family or clan of Bigfoot living along the ridge. He never spoke publicly about it, other than to us and some select friends over the years. He was told not to anyways. He mentioned it once while in Portland, Oregon, at a conference for the USFS, and he mentioned Bigfoot and was practically scolded by a senior official he mentioned. That ended the open conversation outside our close-knit friends and family. The sounds continued from the mountains above here and there, and I remember seeing shadows in the yard late at night occasionally, and sometimes passing by my bedroom window, but no more visuals like the others until I was much older. All good things must. They say all good things must come to an end, and so has my search and my life in the woods for that matter. Actually, when my son grew up and headed out to strike his fortunes in the world, I struck out into the wilds of Washington. I guess you could say I was a hermit of sorts. I was not an off-the-gritter type of person. I was simply a naturalist who wanted to live unencumbered by the busy life so many have today. Personally, I wanted to live among the pine trees and what roamed through them. Only one person knew where I was, my son. I spent years out there in the woods. I even had my own camp in the middle of nowhere. That was somewhere to me. There I had seen Bigfoot several more times and literally had one hanging around my camp for days here and there. He never showed himself, of course, but once. But you could hear him when he was around, that's for sure. I let them be, though. I never collected evidence. I knew they were, and that was all I needed. They are wild things, and they are smart things. I never felt harassed by any means, but we kept our distance from each other anyways. It all ended recently, though. I may be in my early 50s, but I am suffering from something I won't mention here. Either way, it has created a situation that brought to close my life in the woods. Today I am living with my son and his family back in the city, and of all places, Detroit. They're great folks, and even my son and I have put aside some of the complicated issues of the past behind us. I stay indoors most of the time due to my health, but I do get up at night and try to stare out the window and into the night sky, dreaming of home and the Bigfoot that are there. Yes, I'm pretty sad about it all. But I have been getting to know my grandson, Eli, and I have to say, he's a little bit more adventurous like his grandmother than his father. Maybe I'll share my secret place with him before I fade away into the mists of time, and he'll continue my story. Thanks. Gigi.